who's here. Oh, no one wants to talk. They all want to stay anonymous today. Hello, Mark. Thank you for telling us. Hi, Kevin from Pittsfield. Welcome. We have a Cape Cod person. Hi, Mark. Anybody else? I guess everyone else wants to remain anonymous. Meg from Lowell is here. Shannon from Pittsfield. Shannon is the one with the yoga studio, and we're going to definitely want to go to her, Eric, later on. So Shannon, hang in there with us. Hi, Mitchell from Amherst, probably with our Holyoke site. We are going to get started in just a moment. Welcome, everyone. I'm Deborah Gallant from EforAll, Berkshire County. I'm the executive director here. We are recording this webinar, so it will be available for you to review or share with other people if you want. I think I have 11:01 on my computer, and we do try to stick to the time, so I'm going to get going. As I said, I'm Deborah Gallant, EforAll, Berkshire County. I think most people on the call probably know what Entrepreneurship for All, EforAll, is about, but in case you don't, we're a nonprofit organization that helps startup businesses and partners with communities nationwide. We're in 9 cities. I am one of the newest executive directors here in Berkshire County. We're also going to hear in a moment from Donna. Donna, you can give a wave, from our South Coast, New Bedford Fall River site. Yes, Berkshire County, Massachusetts. Although don't tell anyone, I'm actually in New York, but we're safe here. Everybody's, as Donna likes to call me, like Jake from State Farm, I'm Deborah from the bunker. I'm in my bunker here in Canaan, New York. And we put together this weekly series to help our entrepreneurs and EforAll communities across the country stay sane and keep their businesses afloat and thriving during this craziness, this upside down world that we're in. And I'm going to introduce our speaker in a moment, but what we're going to do first is I'm going to throw it to Donna, who is our EforAll Executive Director in Cape Cod and is also a yoga teacher and a wellness person. And she's just going to give us 2 or 3 minutes to center ourselves and be present before we dive in. So Donna, I'm handing off to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Deborah. And thank you everyone for attending. I'm finding these weekly webinars to be really, really helpful as I answer questions and try to serve the people of the South Coast, our EforAll community there. But one of the things that we do at EforAll is we look at the holistic entrepreneur. It's not just about the business, it's about who you are as a person and what support we can put around you to help you on your entrepreneurial journey. So when we were putting these webinars together, we decided people were kind of in not a great place mentally. So that's why we're starting with a grounding session. So if you're driving, please keep your eyes open and you can just listen. But if you're sitting, make sure that you're sitting comfortably in your seat, that your feet are on the floor, you're sitting all the way back in your chair. And then just close your eyes and we're going to start with some nice breathing. So just take a nice deep inhale through your nose and let the breath go all the way into the base of your belly, filling up fully. And then exhaling. On your exhale, let it empty, a full, soft, slow emptying. Just really let that exhale go. And then at the end of your exhale, another nice, long, slow inhale. Just allowing your breath to go all the way into the base of your belly. Let your belly fill. And then allowing that exhale to happen soft and slow and full. The exhale is so much more important than the inhale in times like this. And one more nice deep inhale through your nose. Letting it fill the whole torso. And then exhaling soft, slow, and completely. Allowing your breath to just continue at a nice, steady, even pace. Let your shoulders soften. Maybe they're up by your ears. You can let them relax. Your arms can be heavy by your side or hands in your lap. Let your belly soften. No need to hold anything in. Just let it relax. Let it soften so that you can actually feel your pelvic floor soften as well. And then allow the tops of your thighs to soften. And just staying present. And on your next exhale, you can open your eyes and bring that sense of presence with you as Deborah dives into the next topic.
Thank you so much, Donna, for joining us and kicking us off. And we are going to dive right into our subject matter now that we're all present. I want to introduce Eric Ashman. I'm going to actually let him introduce himself. He is an EforAll about to be board member in Roxbury and a specialist for our EforAll Roxbury. He's in the Boston area. And when we started talking pivot, Kofi, our executive director, said, "You need to talk to Eric." And I'm really pleased with the subject matter we have together. So Eric, tell us a little bit about you.
Sure. Thanks, Deborah. Hello, everybody. So my name is Eric Ashman. I'm the founder of an advisory firm called Bothered Mind Advisors that I launched last year. And the focus of that firm is to help founders find the path to scalable, profitable growth. And so I launched it when times were very good. I think it's particularly relevant right now when times are really difficult. I built that off of the experience. I spent 10 years in New York City building venture-backed high-growth startups. So I was the CFO at the Huffington Post until we sold that company to AOL, and then moved on to the CFO and president of Group 9 Media, one of the largest digital media companies in the world, and took that company through 3 fairly complicated fundraisers. I think beyond that experience, this is now my 3rd really difficult economic downturn. So I was CFO of a global technology PR firm in 2001, which was the dot-com bust. I was at HuffPo and helped them navigate 2008, 2009, which was the Great Recession. And here we are again, and I'm helping clients and companies like yours and startups like yours try to navigate this very difficult time. So a lot of this work is rooted in the work of what I do with Bothered Mind Advisors, but obviously this is a very specific moment in time for us to talk about how do we react, how do we respond, how do we keep our startups alive, and then how do we start to think about what our startups look like after this. Which I think is a lot of what we're going to talk about today.
Great, thank you so much. So if anyone hasn't been with us for these other webinars, we try to create a format that lets you get involved and lets you ask your questions and deliver some value, some food for thought. And in this case, really may have you thinking strongly about what can you do to pivot your business. So here's the format of what we're going to do is Eric and I are going to talk, and we've chunked the content down into sections. As we get to sort of the end of one area, we're going to pause and let you guys enter your questions in the chat box to use the Q&A. There's also the raise hand function in Zoom, and we're happy to unmute people. I do want, before we're done, to check in at least once with Shannon from Pittsfield Radiance Yoga. She has done some amazing things to pivot, and maybe we can all learn from her. But Eric has also said that if we have time in the Q&A at the end, we can do a little bit of popcorn brainstorming using the hive mind, all the people who are on the call, to share ideas, and also for us to share ideas if anyone's going, how do I pivot my kind of a business? So it'll be helpful to know what your business is. So if you haven't already typed that in, please tell us what your business is. But I'm going to start by saying, what is a pivot? Eric, how do you define it, and how do you work with clients? And maybe we all need to just get some terminology straight.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good place to start. I think let's start by what it's not. It's not stopping what you're doing and starting something completely different. The sports analogy is always the basketball pivot, where you keep one foot on the floor and you're moving around that foot. And so it's grounding yourself in what your business is today, what knowledge you bring, what skills you bring, what problems you're trying to solve, but then keeping your eyes open to what's happening externally and finding the best possible next path. And we're going to get into this in a little bit more specificity, but I tend to think that it's easiest to think about a pivot if you think about grounding yourself starting from where you are today. and not trying a complete reboot and relaunch of something completely different. That's a much more difficult thing to do. So many people right now have invested so much time, energy, money in building up your brand, your capability, your skill set, and your resources. So our goal right now, as the world changes around us, is how do we leverage that into what's happening around us and into where our customers might be going, where the market might be going, and so on. So I think that grounding point is really important. Otherwise the change process becomes overwhelming.
So I think to help and have some context, pivoting isn't just in a crisis, although we're going to talk now about why that's more important than ever. What are some companies that have successfully pivoted that you've seen? And if those on the call want to enter them in chat, if they've seen a good pivot, we're open to having other ideas. I actually shared one that I thought was one, and Eric said, that wasn't a pivot, that was just an expansion. So what is a pivot? What's an example?
Yeah, and maybe just to jump ahead, if Casey can bring up slide number 3, this is a great time to talk about types of pivots with very specific examples, because I think bringing this to life and talking about this. And your example, Deborah, was Amazon going from books to selling other things, and that was a business product line expansion. But if you think about examples of pivot, sorry, it's the slide before this, Casey. The one that says what is a pivot? Yeah, this one. So these are types of pivots, and then these are examples of companies that have pivoted. Think about customer segment pivot, and we'll talk about these in a little bit more detail, but Play-Doh is always a really interesting example of a company that in the 30s, Play-Doh was used to clean soot off of walls from coal burning furnaces. And then gas and oil came in, and all of a sudden that wasn't required anymore. And so instead of the company folding up entirely, the founder of Play-Doh had a friend that was an arts and crafts teacher who was using it as clay. And that's how they realized that they had a completely different market. And so in the same way that Airbnb was focused on travel originally and conferences originally, and that market wasn't very big. And so that they realized that there was a much broader, bigger opportunity to go after travel generally, and that became the opportunity. And so we'll get into this in a little bit more detail, but it is not just a product extension. Those things are great. What you're talking about right now is what is your fundamental business? What was it 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago? What was your business when retail stores were open, when people were out walking around, and what does it look like today? And then what do you think it's going to look like in the next 2, 3, 6 months? And what are the changes that you're going to need to make within your business to go find those customers again, to get them to engage, to find marketing channels that are going to work in whatever this new world's going to bring. So we'll run through these different types of pivots in a moment, but it's not a complete reboot of your company. That might be a decision that some people make, but what we really want to focus on and help people think about today is how do you take what your business was and move it into where we think the world is going?
Okay, Casey, I think you can take the slide down and we'll just talk for a little bit. Some of the other ones I've heard about that I thought were interesting. I guess YouTube was a dating application, but then it became this other thing, which is crazy. Somebody from Cape Cod saying Twitter pivoted from being an ambulance dispatcher. I didn't realize that. I thought Twitter launched being Twitter, exactly what it was.
Twitter actually came out of a company called Odeo. So Twitter was originally built out of a podcasting company that failed. So Odeo was a company that was created by the original founders of Twitter. That company failed, and with their last remaining capital, they pivoted into what became Twitter and a messaging application. In the same way that Slack is another example of where the Slack team was actually a gaming company. They built Slack for their developers to communicate with each other. And when the gaming company failed, they realized they had an awesome communication tool. And so again, some of these become reinventions of some core idea that was focused on something else. So there's very different types of pivots. For some folks on this call, your business isn't going to change that dramatically. It doesn't have to be a Twitter or a YouTube or it was one type of app and then we found something else. It could just be that your market shifted, your marketing channels have shifted, your customers are going to change and evolve. And so there's definitely lots of different ways to think about pivoting, to take, again, all the work that you've been doing up until now and figure out how you build value going forward.
So one of the things that I think most people who know my background know I was a business coach for many years. And when I stop and think about it, it's almost like really focusing on the assets of your business, whatever they are, whether it's stuff, whether it's intellectual property, whether it's how you've done business. And people may not think about themselves that way. They may say, I'm the person who delivers X, but there was a lot more to what your business is if you can spend some time doing some, I think, deep thinking, analytical thinking, maybe even reaching out to some of your customers and go, what is it that you value about me? Because understanding what that core asset might be, might not be how you think about yourself.
Well, and just to hang on that point for a moment, because I think this is one really important thing that I'm seeing some companies do well and some not so well, is communicating with your existing customers right now and asking that question is really important. And I take this all the way down to Deborah and I were talking earlier this week, and I mentioned this about my barbershop, who just kind of closed the doors one day, didn't put a sign on their wall, really has no way to communicate with their customer base. And I, who am going to have to at some point put trimmers on my hair, and will then start wearing a hat, I guess, would love the ability to, every time I do that, Venmo that team $20. And you're seeing this with restaurants and gift certificates and so on, but that, I wish I could reach out to that person and say, communicate with your customer base, because there's a bunch of customers in that barbershop that just really care about that group of people and would love to engage for the next 2 months. And so I think more than anything else, even if you're solely focused on offline, you can't go dark right now. You need to find a way to communicate with your customers, whether it's just putting up a Facebook page, putting up a Wix site, putting up a simple website. Let people know you're there. Let people know how to communicate with you. Find out how, if nothing else, find out how valuable you are to your customers, and use that to then gain insight as to what's important to them right now, and also how they're thinking about what happens going forward. So that communication point, I think, is really important. I'm seeing a lot of people just go dark on their client base, and I think that that can be a real mistake.
So last week's webinar was about sales and marketing when everyone's staying at home. And if that advice resonated with you and you're feeling like, well, I can't do what I did, and so pivot doesn't make sense for me, go watch the EforAll.org website, go to the COVID coping webinars and watch what we did last week, because we talked a lot about things like that. I actually know a hairdresser who's been known to put on a wig. This is what she's doing in social media, and show you how to cut your own bangs. She doesn't have any herself. And I'm thinking that that's exactly the kind of thing that you need to be doing. When we carved up these topics, a pivot isn't maybe right for everybody, but it bleeds into some of what you're saying with communicating, Venmoing, figuring out how to stay afloat as we keep going on. So let's talk though specifically about when we're going through a crisis like this, and this is unprecedented, right? There's no rule book. There's no one who's old enough to say, I've seen this before, because no one was alive in 1918 in the Spanish flu, which is the closest thing I think that anybody can think of. But it's not like that at all. Right. So why during this crisis period should we be thinking about pivots? I mean, why is this timely right now?
Yeah, and this is I think the most important framing from my perspective on this is that there's an important change happening right now in terms of business and consumer behavior. So let's take one step back. This is all really hard. And so I'm very humble when I start talking about how we think about our business going forward without just recognizing how hard it is today. And I'm a part of a lot of very difficult conversations right now with companies that their businesses evaporated overnight. I think to your point, Deborah, I was around in 2000 managing a global PR firm. I was around in 2008, 2009. The speed of this disruption is like nothing we've ever seen before. And it's really difficult for people to get their arms around. So I'll say that just to recognize that this is a really difficult moment in time for a lot of folks. But then I'll also then use that as the kind of the leaping into the next point, which is in this moment of unprecedented disruption, you're going to see this really quick change, and I think long-lasting change in consumer and business behavior. And when you see that type of disruption and change, as painful as it is, it also then creates opportunity. So in many respects, it disrupts and puts cracks in the foundations of larger, more established players. It creates openings in, again, consumer and business behavior that larger companies can be slow to exploit and take advantage of. And if you're paying attention and watching what's happening right now, and we can talk about some of the trends that we can think about for the next, not just 2 months or 3 months, but forever, in terms of the changes that the way people are going to behave, you have an opportunity right now to think about how your business is going to evolve to not just capture that and go find out where your customer is and bring them back and figure out a way to engage. But for some companies, there's going to be whole new businesses that can launch right now and whole new ways of thinking about your business, your opportunity, your industry. Taking a step back, going back to this original, one of the reasons that I think the concept of pivoting versus just doing something completely different is so important is because you launched your company because you had a passion, you had a mission, you were trying to solve a particular problem, and you want to try to stay rooted in that. You just want to bring it to wherever the world's going right now. And so I think that there's a meaningful amount of disruption coming. And I think for a lot of us, the question becomes, so what does my company look like in that world? And for some folks, there's going to be a much bigger opportunity on the other side of this. And so as hard as it is, as you stay focused on the day-to-day of keeping your company alive, also giving yourself the space to start to be hopeful, because this disruption and change is going to create some really unique, interesting opportunities.
Yeah, one example I give, and I feel a little bit bad because it's my brother and I throw him under the bus on these webinars, but he runs a messenger service. And when this first happened, his driver said, I'm not walking into law offices anymore. They all basically said, I'm gone. They were 1099 employees. And he shut it down. And he went home and he adopted a dog. And I'm like, yeah, but I just heard, I don't know if you guys heard this, Amazon is stopping its own delivery service. They're leaving deliveries now to UPS and FedEx. And there's this whole idea, especially if the postal service goes out, which there's talk about that, may completely change how things get delivered. Little messenger services like his might be the perfect solution to last mile. He can go to the Amazon warehouse and become an Amazon distributor. I don't know what it is, but if he stays home and he buries his head under the sand and goes, I'm just playing with my dog and I'm going to wait for this to end, he's not going to be positioned to flourish at the other end. And there will be an after. There's going to be some world afterwards, but I think how we all function might be different. I've seen, this is funny, I'm friends with some older people on Facebook and they're going, Instacart, never used it before. Oh my God, home delivery of groceries. It's like things are going to change and they might not go back. I played Jackbox TV this week. I don't know if you played this game where it's a virtual game and you play with people. I never need to have a game night again because this is so much fun to do it virtually. People's behavior is going to change. And if you can find the energy within yourself to think positively about this, there's opportunity. Casey, why don't you bring up the slide that shows the companies that started during difficult times? I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting just in terms of thinking about, these are companies that started in 2008, 2009, so a product of the Great Recession, and then companies that started a couple of years before. A lot of names here you'll recognize. And so, and there's, it's this interesting, and I want to relate this in two ways to today, because not only was there just this great disruption and it impacted a lot of incumbents, which created an opportunity for a lot of new companies to rise up, there was also this was a real unique moment in time from a technology innovation perspective. So the cloud really explodes here. And so AWS, Amazon Web Services, for the first time becomes a really dominant force in the tech space. So almost all of these companies are probably built on that stack. And also the iPhone comes out in 2006, I think. And so you think all of a sudden you've got this ability for Uber and some of these like app-based companies to also blossom. So there's this unique moment where massive disruption, but also technical innovation. And it's worth connecting that to today. It's something I wrote about 6 months ago and just realized how relevant it is today. There's this thing called the no-code movement, which is even 3 or 4 years ago to launch anything on digital, you need some kind of technology expertise. And it's worth just noting how much you can do without a lot of technology know-how in terms of just being able to piece together what we're talking about in terms of some kind of online presence, right? So whether it's Squarespace or Wix, whether it's Stripe or Square. I just I'm mentoring a team in EforAll Roxbury right now, and it was essentially supposed to be an offline clothing business, and they had to quickly get online. And this, somebody who's not technically, has no technology prowess whatsoever, was able to get a Shopify site up. It's one page, but it's got some good imagery on it, and then connect Square to it and start taking payments online for prepayments for deposits. And so you've got really just at this point, things like Wix, things like Squarespace, things like WordPress, Square for payments. Shopify is an amazing platform to get some sort of retail presence up. And you can kind of go right down the stack. There's all of these tools out there that do not require a significant amount of technology experience to implement. So there's no, in a world where we're going virtual, it's easier than ever for people to create some kind of online presence, which creates a bridge to their customer.
I think we could take the slide down, Casey. What I want to say about that is that I think the biggest obstacle now is not technical, but your own mental, I'm not that. I'm a barber. I don't need a website, or I'm a whatever, and I don't want to sell it that way. I want to have my storefront. Well, what you want may not be as relevant as what your customers want. And I think you need to sort of get yourself past that. And also, if you need help, the people who can help you are more available than they ever were. There's this company called Fiverr. I don't know if you've ever used Fiverr. Fiverr can do anything, and they have these low-cost freelance people who will pitch on doing your project. If you're part of an EforAll community, check in with your EforAll executive director. They'll be able to find you someone who can help you. If it's too hard, someone else can do it for you, but it doesn't make sense to let that be the obstacle. I want to just pause here. Somebody asked about the games. We told you it's jackbox.tv. Anybody else have any other questions or comments they want to make? Because I want to go back to that slide about the different kinds of pivots so we can really dig into creatively thinking about the angles and the ways you think about what pivots are, so that because all pivots are not created equal. And actually, when Eric first sent me his content, I think we have 12 kinds, I don't know, a lot of different kinds of pivots, and they come from the lean startup model, but we've narrowed it down to these 4 that we think are relevant for EforAll businesses and the folks on this call. So last call, anybody wants to type in chat or do Q&A and ask about what we've talked about so far? Otherwise, we're going to move on to what it means to do these 4 different kinds of pivots. I think we're good to go. Eric, start with customer segments.
Yeah, so customer segment pivot is really, and again, a lot of this comes out of Lean Startup. I think, and I'm going to plug that book for a second. It's written by Eric Ries. It's about 12-year-old book right now. It's terrific, and there's a lot of we'll touch on a couple of points here today, and they go through different types of pivots. So customer segment pivot is, again, the Play-Doh example is a great one, where it's the same product, it's your same core offering, but it's shifting your customer focus. And so with Play-Doh, where it was going to homeowners that were trying to get soot off the walls, to children that want to use it as an arts and crafts project, or Airbnb that went from, it really launched around this idea of we will tie ourselves to the conference business, and then realized that that was a very small market. And when they opened it up to all travelers and broadened what it meant to be an Airbnb host, the business exploded. This is really about really trying to find who your target customer is. And again, these are not concepts that are specific to this moment in time. And actually, Kevin notes this as well in the chat. Pivoting ultimately gets to the basic framework of how you start your company, right? So a startup is a hypothesis. You've got this idea around, here's a problem I can solve. This is who I think my customer is. This is how I'm going to go to market. And then you're testing your way into proving that you're right. Right now, with all of this disruption and change, you have to get back into that cycle again. And so your customer segment right now might shift. It could shift because more people will be working from home. It could be shifting because we might enter a recession for a year, and so income levels shift. And so the income focus of the customer that you are targeting before changes and shifts a little bit. And so your service stays the same. Your go-to-market might even stay fairly similar, but ultimately the ultimate customer for what you built might change right now, and that's something to be aware of. The channel pivot, and I think we'll get back into this because we have somebody on the call that's in this kind of yoga studio space right now, and there's a real interesting thing going on that I'm seeing with things like yoga studios, meditation studios, wellness. This example, Kristen Lambert is somebody who started a company called Third Piece, and I've been working with her over the last 6 or 7 months. She's an awesome entrepreneur here in Boston, and Third Piece it's focused on knitting. They sell some pre-made knit goods, but they also had a retail store and in-person classes. And she had like a corporate business that was building around in-person sessions, and that business evaporated about a month ago. But she quickly pivoted into virtual, and her business has exploded. So corporate companies, there's so much of a health and wellness aspect to knitting generally. And people need that so much. Yeah.
Shannon, if you're still with us, Casey, can you unmute Shannon so she can tell a little bit about what she's doing with Radiance Yoga?
Yeah,
I think she's still here with us. I'll just take a moment to I think she's listed as the participant as Radiance, not as Shannon. There she is. You need to unmute yourself and you can tell us what you're doing with Radiance Yoga. There you go.
Can you hear me?
Hi, Shannon.
Hey.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, so we, I guess it was the second week of March, we're kind of getting ahead of this, and I have to thank my fiance's company for being ahead and starting work from home early in March so that I was in that headspace too. But yeah, we shut our doors pretty quickly, and we have a lot of members at Radiance Yoga, and they're really like the lifeblood of our income and our stability. And my first thought was not, we need to pause all these memberships. It was, we need to reach out to our members right now and offer something else of value, because many of them are not financially impacted, and they not only want to support us, but they need this right now. Everybody needs something right now to find the same sanctuary and self-care that they were finding at Radiance Yoga before this. So the first thing was, how do we serve our members? And we created an on-demand platform, just like Peloton or Netflix, where members can sign in and search for the teacher and the type of class and the amount of time they have, and fill that need. And then it kind of shifted to, okay, now beyond members, we have a lot of people who come to Radiance Yoga, and how can we serve our entire community? So we offer a lot of free resources for people who are financially impacted. And then we created new ways that people in the community could buy from us and find value right now. And it's funny because we're pivoting again this week, because now that we've filled this on-demand need, I don't think of this because I hate schedules, but we're getting a lot of feedback from people who they want a schedule, they want a live class, because that's going to fill that need for some normalcy in their life. So we've started a couple live weekly classes, but next week we're going to go to a full daily schedule of live classes in addition to on-demand classes. And we're going to do a pay what you like model. So people who are financially impacted can join for free or pay less. And then those who want to support us can pay a normal drop-in fee for a class. And then the last thing I'll just add is that my second business, I do workplace wellness. And what's been really cool is I've started selling the Radiance Yoga online platform to my workplaces as a perk to offer to their employees. So it's really been, I've been able to utilize all these new resources in both businesses, and I can see the silver lining that long term, even when we go back to normal operations, this is going to be a new revenue stream for my companies.
Shannon, I just want to say bravo and well done. I mean, you are like the role model for the rest of us on how to say, okay, I have lemons, let's make some lemonade. So we wish you well, and thank you for sharing your story. I think that's really helpful. And stay with us. Hopefully you'll learn a few more things, but you're a great role model. Thank you so much, Shannon.
Thank you.
Casey, can you bring back the other slides so that we can go to the other kinds of pivots? Eric, can you believe how great she's doing?
No, it's a great story. I love it. And She said something very important that I think we'll touch on again, which is this is not a temporary situation for her. She's creating a new line for her business. And I think those are the most valuable types of pivots that we can talk about and it goes back to my earlier point. Things are changing. There's going to be some permanent changes in the way people behave. And there's an opportunity here for you to build completely new product extensions or service extensions that are going to be valuable down the road. So that's a great story.
The other thing I want to take from that, because I thought it was really interesting, is she used her instincts and her gut to get up and going really quickly with the on-demand portal, but she continued to communicate and listen to her audience and her marketplace and continued to offer more things. So this isn't a one-time, okay, I did this, I'm done. It's evolving. What's crazy to me is how much things change over the course of a day or 2 days during this crisis, and when we're all intensely together. I'm doing one weekly webinar and I get ideas for extra ones every single day because there's so much information. So Shannon listened to her customers and she continued to evolve. And my guess is if we talk to her in a week, something new will have happened and she'll have come up with a great answer for that. So Shannon, thank you so much. I think that was really informative, maybe inspired some of the other people who are in the wellness world. Tell me what a value capture pivot is, Eric, because I don't know.
So value capture can mean you're changing the way you're deriving revenue from the same service. So a really easy example of that, just so people can understand what I mean, is Apple iTunes. They used to charge you to buy a download, right? You would buy a single, you would buy a CD, and then streaming came along, and now it's become a subscription service. And so I pay $10 a month, and I have access to anything I want. I'm seeing similar versions of this where some founders see an opportunity to move from either, one big shift you've been seeing over the last few years in the media space is from advertising to subscription, right? So let's stop going out and try to get advertising dollars. How do I get people to pay me $5 a month for my email newsletter? You're also seeing just a general shift from one-off purchases to subscription. So if you think about the three legs of the revenue stool, typically the simplest way to think about it is advertising, there's subscription, and then there's sale of product and services. And value capture pivot is sliding between the three of those. And thinking a little bit about, can I move from one-off transaction to some sort of consistent payment? Is there a regular kind of cadence to the way that I charge for my services? Maybe I'm charging for materials and there's a different part of the value chain I should be charging for. And so again, just paying attention to shifts that are happening to the marketplace, the way you think about monetization today and revenue could change quite a bit over the next 3 to 6 months. And it's something to pay attention to. Your business, the problem you might be solving might be sound. The way that your customer starts to think about how they want to engage and pay for that service might change. And that's something you want to be aware of.
So I'll just want to give you an example because the subscription thing rings true. There's a newsletter that I get, an email newsletter that's great. It's called Rural Intelligence, and it tells what's going on in the whole Berkshires area all the way into the Hudson Valley. And they have, over the last year, tried to get subscriptions, but it's not really supporting them. And now it's even less. Is this the time for them to think about maybe getting extra advertising? I mean, going another way because maybe the restaurants that are doing takeout are willing to pay for an ad. I mean, it just means being more creative about how you go get revenues, right?
It does. I mean, there's underlying, you've picked a really difficult example because media in general is a very difficult space right now. But it does require quite a bit of creativity. And I think the right answer for an organization like that is it's not actually one answer. I think the media companies in particular, local or national, that are doing well, they're building a subscription layer. They've got an advertising piece as well. And in the last few years, they've actually started to build commerce into that as well. So whether they're, take affiliate revenue or something like that. So I think for all of us, one other really important aspect of this can be resiliency comes through multiple revenue lines. And the clients that I've seen that have done the best over the last 4 to 6 weeks have had at least 2 distribution channels. So the easiest one is if you're in retail, online and offline. Your offline collapses, but your online is still there. So as you think about right now, this idea of value capture, it might not be a full pivot, but it could be an extension, and you've got to go find another channel to go monetize what you do, which ultimately is going to also build more resiliency down the road.
Okay, and let's go to the last kind of pivot. And there is a question that I think maybe we'll unmute this fellow to let him ask his question, but what's a customer need pivot?
So customer need pivot is just recognizing that the services that you are developing, that's not quite hitting the mark with the market, but something else, capability that you have actually is a bigger opportunity. So to be really specific, Potbelly Sandwich Shop actually started it as an antique furniture store, and they sold sandwiches to get people to come. And they realized that the sandwiches was actually the more valuable thing that they did. So they became a sandwich shop. In the same way that Slack was a gaming company that had built this really clever communication tool for the developers, the gaming platform failed, but they realized that they had this really interesting communication tool underneath. And so going back to this idea of that, for a lot of us, when we build our companies, there is ultimately layers of capabilities and skills. The thing that's most customer facing, particularly in moments of significant change, may not be the most valuable part of what you do going forward, but you might have something right underneath the service. And I do think that a lot of this comes back to, Deborah, the point of communication with your customers is incredibly important, because that's how you're going to tease it out. And now more than ever, you want to understand what they value the most about you. And it could be the second or third degree down from what you thought was the most valuable, important thing that you do. And you really want to pay attention to that right now, because that can be a big opportunity for you.
Well, I think EforAll, by running these webinars, is showing that one of the things we have is great reach into the entrepreneur community, and in all of the communities that we serve. This is not starting up a new business. This is not traditionally what we do, but I think it's important, and we're using the resource and the assets that we have to, not a big pivot, maybe it's just an additional way to stay in touch, but I think it's really valuable. Yeah. Casey, can you unmute Kevin, who seemed to have a very specific question about his pivot on a company that was pivoting from traditional manufacturing to organic production. I think you can read it. Kevin, if you'll unmute yourself, you can explain your situation, and maybe Eric and I can add some insight for you.
Hello?
We can hear you.
Yes, my question was more towards companies that were pivoting towards something that was an ascendant. So just an example, like to going zero waste or going towards organic production and such, which was kind of like the crisis not affected their business model. Is still a lot of online, but the topic seems a little less relevant now. Kind of like it's not so much companies.
Do you stay the course, or do you make a big adjustment? Is that the question?
Yeah. Yes, because a lot of companies just have no way of relating to the crisis or being any assistance to their customers, particularly crisis related. I don't know. I find like a lot of us are just like kind of in a limbo.
So that's a great question. Thank you for asking it, Kevin.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Deborah, do you want to start, or I have a couple of thoughts?
You go.
Okay. I think it varies company by company. What I'll say is, so there's a multi-step plan here. First step is how severe does this current situation impact your company? If I have some companies I'm advising right now where a month ago they had over a year worth of cash runway and they were feeling really good about themselves, and that just got cut down to 3 months. In that situation, you're not doing anything that's about repositioning the company 2 years from now. You have to react now. And so rule number one is you have to give yourself the headspace to think about how your business evolves. So if that's the situation, you're not worried about organic production, you're worried about keeping the lights on today. I think two is some companies are not as severely impacted by this crisis as others. And so if it's a company that's going from traditional manufacturing to organic production, and ultimately their company actually doesn't get hurt all that badly from this, they might continue down that path. There's not just dramatic shift in strategy that they have to worry about. So it really, I think it's company by company. But if you're a company where your market has just shifted out beneath your feet, you have to focus on reacting to that first. Because you got to make sure your company is on the right growth path, that your cash flow, you have cash in the bank, that you're going to continue to generate cash. You got to land that plane first, and then give yourself the time to move back into longer term planning. This is not a time for 24-month plans for most companies. Most companies should be very much focused on how do I get to the summer? And then from the summer, how do I thrive beyond that and start to grow again?
I think this actually resonates with Gail Goodman, the chair of EforAll's board, on a webinar. She said, you want to live to see the next day, because if you're not alive, the rest of it doesn't matter. But let's actually segue into, how do I even get ready to do this pivot? And, you know, I think one of the things that you don't want to do is make this out of a panic-stricken, deer in headlights kind of knee-jerk reaction. You want it to be a little bit more measured. So what's your advice to people who are thinking about pivoting?
Yeah, I think that point about knee-jerk reaction is really important. So first and foremost, going back to the point I just made, you've got to give yourself the space to think about what's coming next. And that means, to Gail's point, make sure that you can live to fight another day. So you have to get out of survival mode to be thoughtful about what is coming down the pike. And so make sure you have cash in the bank and that you have enough cash to operate day to day for 6 months, 12 months, whatever it's going to be. You need to just make sure that mentally and operationally your business is in an okay place. But then there's a fairly methodical process for thinking about how you execute a pivot. So again, this is not a crisis concept. It is a concept that serves us well in a crisis, but you are getting back to fundamentals of lean startup and how you start a company and the process of ideation to product development to launch. And going through the concept of the process of testing new customer segments and channels and value capture and all of those things. There's a real methodology to that Deborah, we can talk about.
So I think let's bring up that third slide, Casey, because I think it does help explain that. And I want to just say, as this slide is coming up, that it's not always dead obvious what your pivot should be. I mean, we know that I'm not going to say Shannon's pivot wasn't easy, but you know, moving a yoga class online is a pretty logical straight line thinking kind of thing. It's not as easy for everyone, and we know that, but this is a concept that we teach in EforAll about failing fast. Yeah. And so I think this is worth revisiting as you think about doing this pivot. Once you have an idea, hopefully, or a couple of ideas, how do you make this work? So Eric, walk us through the slide.
Yeah, and to that point, and so this is the build, measure, learn feedback loop. Again, it comes right out of lean startup. It's a really smart way of thinking about even the exercise that Shannon went through, which was basically this concept, which is I have an idea. I think I'm going to take my business online and see if people are there. You launch it, you market it, and then you see if people engage. And through that engagement, you quickly learn whether there's interest and value and opportunity there. And so the trick is to make this a lightweight process, because we want to move fairly quickly. You don't necessarily know what the answer is. Going right back to core principles of starting a startup, you want to test some hypothesis, so I think my audience can move online and I think I can run classes that way, but you want to quickly find out whether you're right or not, because you want to quickly move and find the path to the most opportunity. And so again, getting back to this loop, and understanding the drivers of your business. So, and this is where the data piece, and there's a much longer conversation around, tying your KPIs to your financial model and making sure that you're generating profits and cash, right? Like, we will get into all of that. But this idea of when I go online, when I launch my yoga classes online, what needs to happen for me to prove that this is a viable part of my business going forward? And so I need to drive this many visitors to my sign up page. I need this many people to sign up. I need them to pay $15, $25, $50 a session, and I need this many clients in every session to make it viable. These are things that you want to have in your head, and then you can quickly spin up these different ideas and test them and see which take hold. And so I'll pause there for a second, but this is where it's not spaghetti against the wall. You are not in a frenzy of activity trying to hit all different channels of marketing. You want to get as methodical as you should have been the day you launched your business. And you're going to move quickly through this cycle to find where your customers and your market and your segments are now.
I think that's a really good advice. KPIs, in case you're wondering, key performance indicators, and they're going to be different for everyone's business. I know that one of our entrepreneurs here in Berkshire County, Erin Laundrie has a Lego brick building birthday party business, and she's had to close the storefront. And so she is delivering $20 creativity to go bags, and she knows exactly how much they cost her to do, and they, you know, what the profit margin is and how far she's willing to deliver. So this is not just panic selling, it's being measured and thoughtful. And is it worth it? Is she making enough money on those $20 bags to bother to do it? So I'm going to pause here and ask if anyone has any questions, because we want to wrap this up in about 8 minutes. And we've really enjoyed hearing your questions and conversation in the chat box. And if anyone wants to get active and ask us to unmute them, we can do that. Otherwise, I'm going to keep going and try to get us through here in the next few minutes. Eric, this has been really helpful. And I have to say, my wheels are spinning with a couple of the kinds of businesses. I know there was a photographer on the call, and I have heard that people are paying to have COVID outside photographs, right, from a distance, you know, from the front of my house. Here's us sheltering in place, which seems kind of odd, but why not if somebody's willing to pay for it?
Well, and I think that this is where you start to extend to, look, there's the next 2 months where we're all stuck in our homes. But when we get to June, July, and August, people are going to still be behaving differently. And so I think there's that exercise of, so what does my business look like then? And the photographer idea, I think about my barber, where maybe people still won't want to come to the shop, and he needs to think about how he's going to get remote, right? And allow us to schedule appointments, and he'll come into your backyard and he'll wear his mask and he'll do it there. I think it's going to require that type of creativity, because I do think we're in a cycle of, it's not just the permanent change, but it'll be staggered recovery. And so I think the photographer, the people that were built around studios in particular, all the way up to retail, up to big sporting events, it's going to be a really difficult, challenging year in the traditional sense. And so you need to really rethink how you're going to engage with your customers, because you can't wait. You've got to figure out what your service offering is going to look like in that respect.
So Meg, the photographer, is telling us that those front porch projects are actually a terrible failure. So we're not going to go there. Okay, thanks, Meg, for letting us know that. I want to just wrap us up here with something that you and I have been talking about sort of on the side, but I think it's really important, is this idea of your own strength and resolve and mental health, because you have to really find your best self to get through this. And it's hard when you're here. I am stuck in my bunker and you're where you are. It's everybody's home, and it's really hard to feel sustained during this. I mean, what are you seeing out there?
I think that's right. I think it's really difficult on a number of different levels. The only things that, and these are the things that work for me and that I see are working for others, there's I always put up a slide in some of my presentations around Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So there's the basics around fitness and sleep and food and doing your best and all of those things. But then I think beyond that, it's doing your best to get engaged in work like this and sessions like this. I think you're talking to other founders, so working through EforAll and organizations like that to collaborate, commiserate, but also ideate is really important. And then I also think trying to find a way to communicate with your customers, going back to that again. I think the worst thing that we can do is get stuck in our bunker. It's really hard, but we have to get out, even though it's virtually right now. Everybody's struggling. There's an incredible amount of pain and hardship going on right now. And the only way I think that we can get through this is together. And I think that, with knowing that we will come out of this and everything will look a little bit different, building hope and some energy around what your company will look like and where can you go, and actually taking some of that nervous energy and that where our emotions are right now and translating it into, where's my business going? And so what I'm trying to do is generate that excitement again, because there's a little bit of that early startup energy that you can bring back into this moment of time to go rediscover your new market, which, if nothing else, is positive energy, which helps, I think, in a lot of respects. So those are a few things I would suggest.
Yeah, so I will say that as the person who coordinates these webinars every week, I am really aware of this mental health and resilience and optimism, and that's going to be next week's topic. So the Berkshire County people know Linda Dooley from Dooley and Company and the Dooley Leadership Forum. She is going to join me as my guest, and we're going to talk about some of the things we can do personally as business people and just as human beings to keep our own best self forward. The thing that I tell everyone when they're starting a business is if you're not on your A game, none of it is going to work. And I think that's particularly true now. And it's really hard to get to your A game if what gets you there is other people and outside activity and all the rest. So I'm an ENTJ on Myers-Briggs, which means I take my energy from other people, and it's really hard to get it from Zoom screens, but I'm working on it. Yeah. So that's next Wednesday at 11. We do these every week. Does anyone have any other questions, things they want to ask Eric about, popcorn some ideas around their own pivot? We really appreciate all of you being here. We have recorded this session, and a couple of you are telling us that you found it to be very helpful. Colin Knight, why don't you ask us your question, if Casey can unmute you, about walking and chartered tours in Boston. Hey, Colin, you can just unmute yourself and you can ask your question.
Yes, how you guys doing? Thank you so much for the meeting.
Hi, Colin.
How are you? I started a neighborhood tour last year, trying to get people in the city of Boston to experience the culture and the food and the history of the neighborhoods away from downtown. Yep. Obviously, we know that that's not something that we can do now. And I'm thinking now, I've talked to some other people about maybe doing a virtual tour, maybe even creating an app for a virtual tour to go through these neighborhoods. And I was just wondering what you guys think about that as a kind of a pivot.
I don't want to do it from home. I want you to do it so I can have the people I'm sheltering in my house with. We can all go together and we can order food in advance and pick it up from that place. I want you to give me a car tour that I can self-isolate, but still see all the things on your thing. That's my idea.
Yeah, no, I was absolutely thinking about going to these actual places. I was thinking about getting back to normalcy in some way. And so I didn't want to give away all of the great stuff that I had been doing, like when you're actually together having a human connection. But it doesn't seem like we're going to get back to that anytime soon. And so I think that the virtual route, like what you were just saying, Deborah, is a great idea.
I would totally pay, like, I don't know, $20 for a carload of people, and you're going to give me the link so I can order the food and it'll be ready for me to pick up when I get to the neighborhood. I think that's great. Eric, what do you think?
Yeah, I like that. So one thing, Colin, don't try not to build an app. They're really expensive, and you can do things virtually using existing tools. So, you can Zoom Deborah's suggestion and have food ready for people, and that could be a really interesting way. I'll also say, though, the world is going to come back, and then people are going to want to find safe ways to have real life experiences. And so, again, because you need to find something that people will consistently pay for. And so you might be able to find a way where you're kind of marketing this in a way where it's smaller groups. When you bring them into a restaurant, you've got a special space where people can spread out a little bit more. And you start to, I think a lot of us are going to start to frame what we do in terms of safe for this moment in time, but still helping people to re-engage and get back outside. So virtual is important, but also I think people are going to be looking for safe experiences to re-engage with.
Great. I was thinking about the app really quickly, just as far as like, not just about Boston, but, we don't know like if this is going to happen again. And so if there were an app, although they are expensive, I get that I could spread across the world and show people the areas from Spain, from a bunch of different places if I were to scale. That's why I was thinking about the app.
Yeah. Well, I know we're going to run out of time in a minute, but Colin, I know I think you're with Roxbury right now.
I am.
If you want to reach out to me separately, I can talk to you a little bit more about that.
There you go. You got a private consultation out of it, Colin. Thanks.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Eric. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Colin. Take care.
All right, it is time to wrap up. We have spent an hour. For those of you who spent this hour with us, thank you so much. Shannon, Kevin, Colin, for sharing. This was a terrific webinar. Next week, again, resilience, optimism, and leadership. And for those of you who are celebrating Passover, have a wonderful Seder. And we'll see you next week. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Casey, for all the tech. Bye-bye.
Stay healthy. Bye-bye.
Bye.